The red dust of Dusthaven clung to everything like a second skin. Brennan Ashford wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of rust-colored grime across his weathered face. His homestead sat alone in the Crimson Flats, a collection of solar-powered structures that looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts and stubbornness, which, truthfully, they had been. 49 years old and built like someone who'd spent half their life wrestling machinery and livestock. Brennan had the kind of face that told stories without permission. Deep lines around his eyes from squinting against the endless sun. A jaw that hadn't seen a proper razor in weeks. Hands that were more callous than skin. He wasn't much to look at, and he knew it. The communication terminal beeped softly from inside his main habitat. Brennan ignored it for another minute, finishing the weld on the water collector that had sprung a leak during the night. The Crimson Flats didn't forgive carelessness, and water was more precious than any metal or gemstone the core worlds traded. When he finally trudged inside, boots leaving red prints on the metal floor, the terminal displayed 3 new responses to his advertisement. 3 more women willing to travel across half the galaxy to meet a frontier rancher they'd never seen. 3 more chances at not spending the rest of his life talking to thornback cattle. Brennan had posted the message 6 weeks ago, during a moment of weakness that came after celebrating his birthday alone with a bottle of synthetic whiskey and too many memories. The Galactic Settlement Network had thousands of lonely souls scattered across hundreds of worlds, all searching for connection in the vast emptiness of colonized space. Seeking honest companionship, I offer shelter, meaningful work, and loyalty. My home lies far from cities and crowds. If solitude doesn't frighten you, consider visiting. He'd been careful with his words, trying not to sound desperate, even though desperation had been exactly what drove his fingers across the keypad. The first 2 responses had come within days. Both women had made the journey to Dusthaven, taken one look at his ramshackle homestead in the middle of nowhere, and caught the next transport back to civilization. The third visitor had been particularly memorable. A sharply dressed woman named Victoria from the manufacturing world of Forge Prime. She'd stepped off the shuttle in heels that immediately sank into the red dust, looked around at the endless, empty horizon, and laughed so hard she nearly cried. "This is what you call a home?" She'd said between gasps. "This is a punishment colony without the guards." She'd been back on her shuttle within an hour, still laughing. Brennan had watched the transport lift off and felt something inside him calcify just a little bit more. The 4th and 5th visitors hadn't been much better. One woman had lasted an entire afternoon before declaring the silence oppressive and demanding to leave. Another had taken one look at his 30 head of thornback cattle, massive 6-legged beasts with attitudes to match their size, and refused to exit the shuttle at all. Word had apparently spread through the settlement network. The latest messages in his terminal carried a different tone, more curious than hopeful. Some seemed almost mocking, as if responding just to see the legendary wasteland homestead that kept driving women away. Brennan cycled through the new responses without much interest. A teacher from New Geneva looking for adventure. A merchant's daughter tired of city life. A botanist studying frontier ecosystems. All the messages had the same underlying question that nobody wanted to ask directly. Why would anyone choose to live here? He was about to close the terminal when one final message appeared, time-stamped just minutes ago. "Your home sounds peaceful. I would like to visit. My name is Seraphine. No species listed. No world. No hollow image attached. Just a name and a simple statement." Something about the message's directness made Brennan pause. After 8 years alone on Dusthaven, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people, even through digital communication. He sent back coordinates and docking clearance, then went back outside to finish his repairs. 3 days later, a cargo hauler appeared in the orange sky, its engines kicking up massive clouds of red dust as it settled onto the landing pad Brennan had carved from bedrock. He watched from the shadow of his workshop, curious despite himself. The cargo ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. The figure that emerged made Brennan straighten up from his lean against the wall. She was Velthara, he realized immediately, one of the telepathic species from the outer reach worlds. Her skin had an opalescent quality, shifting between soft purple and deep blue, depending on how the light hit it. She stood perhaps a head shorter than Brennan, but carried herself with quiet confidence. Her eyes were large and dark, without visible pupils, giving her an otherworldly appearance that went beyond the obvious differences in biology. She wore practical clothing, sturdy pants, and a work jacket that had seen better days. A single bag hung from her shoulder. As she walked toward him across the dusty ground, Brennan found himself holding his breath. Seraphine stopped a respectful distance away, those dark eyes studying him with an intensity that felt like being read from the inside out. Brennan Ashford? Her voice had a musical quality, each word carefully pronounced. That's me. Welcome to Dusthaven. She looked past him at the homestead, the solar collectors catching the afternoon sun, the livestock pens where the thornbacks were starting their evening feeding routine, the greenhouse dome where he grew what vegetables he could coax from hydroponic systems, the wind generators spinning lazily in the constant breeze. It is exactly as you described, she said. Remote, quiet, honest. Brennan waited for the but, for the disappointment or mockery that usually followed such observations. It didn't come. Instead, Seraphine turned those unsettling dark eyes back to him. May I see more? Sure. There's water inside if you need it. The heat takes some getting used to. They walked through the homestead together, Brennan pointing out the various structures and systems that kept him alive in the Crimson Flats. The main habitat with its reinforced walls and temperature regulation. The workshop filled with tools and spare parts. The water reclamation system that pulled moisture from the air. The backup power cells buried underground. Seraphine asked practical questions about maintenance schedules, supply deliveries, emergency protocols. She listened to his answers with complete attention, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. She didn't flinch at the sparse accommodations or comment on the isolation. When they reached the thornback pens, one of the massive beasts lumbered over to investigate. These creatures stood twice as tall as a man, with thick hides covered in bony plates and 6 powerful legs that could crush rock. They were notoriously temperamental, tolerating Brennan only because he'd raised them from calves. Seraphine walked directly to the fence. The thornback lowered its massive head, nostrils flaring as it caught her scent. Brennan tensed, ready to pull her back if the animal charged. Instead, the thornback made a low rumbling sound and pressed its head against the fence where Seraphine stood. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on the creature's armored snout. They are afraid, she said softly. All of them carry fear beneath their aggression. Brennan stared. In 8 years of raising thornbacks, he'd never thought of them as afraid. Angry, stubborn, occasionally homicidal, but not afraid. Fear of what? Being alone, being abandoned. She stroked the thornback's head gently. Their herd instinct runs deep. They need connection to feel safe. The thornback huffed and pulled away, apparently satisfied with the interaction. It rejoined the others, who were watching with what Brennan could now recognize as curiosity rather than hostility. You're Velthara, Brennan said. I've heard your people can sense emotions. Seraphine nodded. It is both gift and burden. I feel what others feel, whether I wish to or not. Must make it hard to be around people. Sometimes. She looked at him directly. But you do not broadcast your emotions loudly. You keep them contained, controlled. It is restful. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the crimson flats in deeper shades of red and orange. The wind carried the scent of dust and distance. Why did you come here? Brennan finally asked. To Dusthaven, I mean. This isn't exactly a vacation destination. Seraphine's expression, alien as it was, conveyed something that might have been sadness. Because the others left. Because you keep trying despite rejection. Because loneliness recognizes loneliness, even across species. The first night Seraphine stayed at the homestead, Brennan couldn't sleep. He lay in his quarters, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving through his space. The soft pad of footsteps, the gentle hiss of the water dispenser, the creak of furniture bearing weight it hadn't supported in years. He'd offered her the guest quarters, a small room he'd built years ago with optimistic visions of visitors who never came. She'd accepted without fuss, asking only where she could store her single bag. No complaints about the basic amenities or the recycled air that carried a faint metallic tang. When morning came, Brennan found her already awake, standing outside watching the sunrise. Dusthaven's star climbed slowly over the horizon, turning the crimson flats into an ocean of molten copper. Seraphine stood perfectly still, her opalescent skin reflecting the dawn light in shifting patterns of purple and gold. "Beautiful," she said without turning around. "Your world is beautiful in ways that require patience to see. Most people just call it desolate. Most people look without seeing." She glanced at him, those dark eyes catching the light. They measure worth by convenience and comfort. They miss the truth beneath. Brennan joined her at the railing, two figures silhouetted against the vast emptiness. What truth is that? That some things become precious precisely because they are difficult. That beauty earned through hardship carries more weight than beauty freely given. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, and Brennan felt something shift in his chest. A loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The days developed a rhythm. Brennan taught Seraphine the routines of frontier ranching, showing her how to operate the solar collectors, maintain the water systems, and manage the thornback herd. She learned quickly, her movements deliberate and precise. Within a week, she could handle most daily tasks without supervision. The thornbacks responded to her in ways they'd never responded to Brennan. She'd walk among them fearlessly, and the massive beasts would part like water, their usual aggression replaced by something resembling calm. When Brennan asked how she did it, Seraphine simply smiled. "I share their fear with them," she explained. "When they feel that I understand, they relax. Fear acknowledged is fear diminished." She worked without complaint, even when the tasks were dirty or difficult. Mucking out the thornback shelters, repairing fence sections in the brutal midday heat, hauling equipment across the dusty ground. Her clothing became stained with red dust and sweat, and she wore the signs of labor like badges of honor. In the evenings, they'd sit on the habitat's porch and watch the sunset. Brennan found himself talking more than he had in years, sharing stories of his early days on Dusthaven, the struggles to establish the homestead, the learning curve with the thornbacks, the loneliness that had slowly become his constant companion. Seraphine listened with complete attention, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood not just his words but the feelings beneath them. She shared her own history in return, speaking of her homeworld in the outer reach, a place of dense forests and bioluminescent life, where Velthara lived in harmony with their environment. "Why did you leave?" Brennan asked one evening as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. Her skin shifted toward darker shades of blue, a sign of emotion Brennan was learning to recognize. "Because I loved someone who could not love me in return. Because staying meant feeling his indifference every day, and that pain became unbearable. I'm sorry. Do not be. Pain teaches us what we need to learn." She looked at him. "I needed to learn that running towards solitude is sometimes wiser than staying in crowds that make you feel alone." The supply transport arrived on the 15th day of Seraphine's stay. A gruff trader named Boone who made monthly runs to isolated homesteads across the Crimson Flats. He landed his battered shuttle with his usual lack of finesse, kicking up clouds of dust that took minutes to settle. Brennan met him at the cargo ramp to collect his supplies. Crates of preserved food, replacement parts, medical supplies, and the occasional luxury item Brennan allowed himself. Boone was hauling boxes when he spotted Seraphine emerging from the greenhouse. The trader's weathered face twisted into something ugly. "You got yourself an alien now, Ashford. Couldn't find a human woman desperate enough? She's helping with the ranch." Brennan kept his voice level, though his hands clenched into fists. "Helping?" Boone spat into the red dust. "That what they call it now? Man lives alone long enough. Guess he'll take what he can get. Even if it's some purple freak who probably can't even." Brennan's fist connected with Boone's jaw before the trader could finish. The larger man stumbled backward, surprise and anger flooding his face. He lunged forward, and they grappled in the dust, throwing clumsy punches that connected more with air than flesh. "Stop!" Seraphine's voice cut through the struggle with unexpected force. Both men froze, something in her tone compelling obedience on a level deeper than conscious thought. She walked toward them, her dark eyes fixed on Boone. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that made the traitor flinch. "You will complete your delivery. You will leave. You will not return to this homestead. Someone else will service this route from now on." "Now wait just a minute," Boone started. "Your fear is showing." Seraphine stepped closer, and somehow, despite being half his size, she seemed to tower over him. "Fear of what you don't understand. Fear of your own inadequacy. Fear that maybe kindness and connection matter more than the prejudices you cling to. I feel it all, traitor. Every petty, small emotion you carry." Boone's face went pale. He backed toward his shuttle, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Freak," he muttered, but the word lacked conviction. They watched the shuttle lift off in a cloud of red dust and engine wash. Brennan's knuckles were bleeding, his jaw throbbing where Boone had landed a solid hit. He felt foolish and angry, and something else he couldn't quite name. "You didn't have to do that," Seraphine said softly. "Fight for me." "Yes, I did." Brennan met her eyes. "Nobody talks about you like that." "Nobody." Something shifted in her expression. Gratitude, mixed with surprise, mixed with something warmer that made Brennan's pulse quicken. She reached out and took his bleeding hand in both of hers, her touch gentle despite the calluses they both carried. "Thank you." That night, they sat closer on the porch than usual. The twin moons of Dusthaven were rising, casting silver light across the crimson flats. The wind carried its usual whisper of dust and distance, but somehow it felt less lonely with Seraphine beside him. "Tell me about your first year here," she said. "What kept you going when everything was difficult?" Brennan thought back to those early days. The equipment failures and learning curves. The isolation that sometimes felt like physical weight. The question of whether he'd made a terrible mistake leaving civilized space for this empty world. Stubbornness mostly, he admitted, and the belief that some things are worth the struggle. That building something with your own hands, even if it's hard, means more than having everything handed to you. You still believe that? More than ever. He glanced at her, at the way moonlight played across her opalescent skin. Especially now, Seraphine turned to face him fully. Her dark eyes reflected the starlight, making them seem infinite. "Brennan, I need to tell you something." "All right." The others who came here, they left because they could not see past the surface. They saw isolation instead of peace, hardship instead of meaning. They looked at you and saw only scars and rough edges. He tensed, old defensiveness rising. "And what do you see?" She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. "I see a man who chose difficulty because ease felt like surrender. I see strength that doesn't need to prove itself. I see loneliness transformed into solitude, and solitude into something resembling wisdom." She paused. "I see home." Brennan's breath caught. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. "I feel your emotions," she continued, "even when you try to hide them. I have felt them since I arrived. Fear of rejection, hope struggling against expectation, and underneath it all, something else. Something that mirrors what I feel." "What do you feel?" His voice came out rougher than intended. Seraphine's skin shifted toward warmer purple tones, and Brennan realized it was her species' equivalent of a blush. "I feel like I have been running toward this moment without knowing it. Like every step that brought me away from my home world was actually bringing me here. To you. To this place that everyone else sees as nowhere." He should say something, should find words adequate to the moment. But language felt insufficient, so instead he did what instinct demanded. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't pull away. Their lips met gently, a question and answer both. Her skin was cooler than his, smooth with an almost electric quality that sent tingles through his nerves. She tasted of strange spices and something sweet he couldn't identify. The kiss lasted only moments, but felt like it rewrote something fundamental in Brennan's understanding of what was possible. When they parted, Seraphine was smiling. a real smile that transformed her alien features into something radiant. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not as a visitor. Not temporarily. I want to build a life here with you." Brennan felt his eyes burning with emotions he'd kept locked away for years. "You're sure? It's not easy. It's lonely and hard, and there's no guarantee." She silenced him with another kiss, deeper this time. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "I'm sure. Some people search their whole lives for what we have found in 3 weeks. I will not walk away from that." They sat together under the twin moons, hands intertwined, while the crimson flats stretched endlessly around them, and the future suddenly felt full of possibility. The seasons changed slowly on Dusthaven, marked more by subtle shifts in wind patterns than dramatic weather. Seraphine had been at the homestead for 4 months when the first real test came. Brennan woke to his emergency alert system, screaming warnings through the habitat. He bolted from his quarters, nearly colliding with Seraphine in the corridor. Her skin had shifted to dark blue, reflecting the alarm's urgency. "Dust storm," Brennan said, checking the readouts. "Big one, moving fast from the northwest." The monitors showed a wall of red chaos rolling across the crimson flats. These storms could strip paint from metal and bury structures under meters of dust. They were rare but deadly, and Brennan had only weathered 2 in his 8 years on Dusthaven. "The Thornbacks," Seraphine said immediately. "They'll panic. We need to get them into the reinforced shelter." Brennan was already moving, grabbing his protective gear. "We have maybe 30 minutes before that storm hits." They ran outside into air that already tasted of electricity and dust. The Thornback herd was agitated, the massive beasts pacing and bellowing. Getting 30 spooked animals into shelter would be nearly impossible, even with 2 people working together. Seraphine walked directly into the middle of the herd. Brennan shouted a warning, but his voice was lost in the rising wind. He watched, heart in his throat, as the Thornbacks surrounded her. Their usual aggression seemed amplified by the approaching storm. Then Seraphine closed her eyes and went very still. The change was immediate and eerie. The Thornbacks stopped their agitated movement. One by one, they turned toward the reinforced shelter as if responding to a signal Brennan couldn't hear. They moved in an orderly line, their panic replaced by calm purpose. "She's sharing her emotions with them," Brennan realized, projecting calm directly into their minds. The herd filed into the shelter without resistance. Seraphine walked among them, one hand occasionally touching an armored hide in reassurance. Within 15 minutes, all 30 Thornbacks were safely enclosed. The storm hit like a physical force. Brennan and Seraphine barely made it back to the main habitat before visibility dropped to 0. The wind howled like something alive and angry, and the structure groaned under the assault. They sealed the emergency shutters and waited in the dimness of backup lighting. Dust found its way through every microscopic gap, creating a fine haze in the recycled air. The storm's roar made conversation nearly impossible. Brennan checked the structure integrity monitors obsessively. The habitat had been built to withstand this kind of punishment, but there was always the possibility of catastrophic failure. A breach in the walls would mean suffocation in a matter of minutes. Seraphine sat beside him, her presence a steady comfort. Her hand found his in the darkness, and they held on to each other as the world outside tried to tear itself apart. The storm lasted 18 hours. When the winds finally died and Brennan unsealed the shutters, the crimson flats had been transformed. Drifts of red dust had piled against every structure. The solar collectors were buried. The greenhouse dome had a crack running along one side. It took 3 days to dig out and assess the damage. The solar collectors could be cleaned. The greenhouse could be repaired. The water reclamation system had kept functioning. The Thornbacks emerged from their shelter tired but unharmed. They'd survived, but barely. "That was closer than I like to think about," Brennan admitted on the 3rd evening. "Another hour of that wind, and we might have lost structural integrity." Seraphine leaned against him. They were covered in red dust, exhausted from days of constant repair work. "But we didn't lose it. We held together." Her words carried meaning beyond the physical. They'd weathered their first crisis as a partnership, and something had solidified between them. The connection that had begun as tentative hope had become something stronger, something that felt permanent. That night, as they lay together in Brennan's quarters for the first time, Seraphine traced the calluses on his hands. "Each scar tells a story," she murmured. "Each mark is evidence of survival." Brennan kissed her forehead, breathing in the strange, sweet scent of her skin. "I never thought I'd find this. Someone who sees this life as something other than exile." Her skin shifted to warm purples and pinks, colors he'd learned meant contentment and affection. "I never thought I'd find someone whose emotions feel like home. But yours do. Your steadiness, your strength, your capacity for hope despite disappointment." She looked up at him. "You're everything I didn't know I was searching for." They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. The biological differences between their species mattered less than the emotional connection that bound them. When she gasped against his shoulder and her skin blazed with bioluminescent patterns, Brennan felt like he was holding starlight. Afterward, they lay tangled together while the twin moons cast silver light through the window. The crimson flats stretched beyond, no longer empty, but full of shared purpose and possibility. "I love you," Brennan said. The words felt simultaneously inadequate and exactly right. Seraphine's eyes reflected the moonlight. "I love you too." She paused. "I want you to understand something. Velthara mate for life. When we choose completely and forever." His heart stuttered. "Is that what you're doing? Choosing me?" "Yes." Her smile was radiant. "I choose you. I choose this life. I choose the crimson flats and the thornbacks and the dust storms and the beautiful, terrible isolation of this place. I choose all of it because you are here." Brennan pulled her closer, feeling the cool smoothness of her skin against his warmth. "Then I choose you too. For life. For however long that means." They sealed the promise with a kiss, and the universe felt balanced in ways Brennan had never experienced. The months became a year. Then two. The homestead thrived under their combined efforts. The thornback herd grew as calves were born. The greenhouse expanded. New solar collectors went up. Other settlers in the Crimson Flats heard about the strange partnership between the human rancher and his Velthara companion, and some came to visit out of curiosity. They found a working ranch run with quiet efficiency. They found two people who moved around each other with the unconscious coordination of long partnership. They found love that had taken root in hostile soil and bloomed despite every reason it shouldn't exist. Brennan stood on his porch one evening, Seraphine beside him, watching the sunset paint the Crimson Flats in gold and crimson. The same view that had once felt like evidence of his isolation now felt like proof of how far he'd come. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving your homeworld? Choosing this instead?" Seraphine took his hand, her skin warm against his palm. "Never. This is where I belong. With you." She gestured at the vast emptiness around them. "Everyone who came before me saw only what was missing. They couldn't see what was actually here. And what's here?" She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes infinite and full of love. "Everything that matters. Home, purpose, partnership, love that was worth crossing the galaxy to find." Brennan kissed her as the sun touched the horizon. The thornbacks called to each other in their evening routine. The wind whispered its eternal song across the red dust. And two souls who'd been wandering alone had finally found where they belonged. Together in the wasteland that everyone else had mocked and abandoned. Together in the home they'd built from hope and stubbornness. Together in love that proved the universe's vastness could be crossed by those brave enough to try. The stars emerged overhead, countless and bright. And in the quiet darkness of the Crimson Flats, Brennan Ashford and Seraphine held each other close, two hearts beating as one under an alien sky that had become theirs. Their story was just beginning.